Hello, and welcome to America's Veterans. My name is Len Sorotsky, and I will be your host. In my home state of Illinois, at the end of World War II, there were approximately 1,000 different school districts. Some of those were elementary school districts only, some were high school districts only, and some were called unit districts because they had both high schools and elementary schools. Since then, through a process of consolidation, there are only 866 school districts for 102 counties in Illinois. Florida has 67 counties, and each county has its own school district. Hence, 67 counties, 67 school districts, plus a few others. Just about 30 years ago, I earned my doctorate in educational administration. That degree opened the door for me to apply for the position of superintendent. And that is exactly what many of my friends thought I would do. However, during my career, I had worked with many different school districts, and in no way would I want to be a superintendent. Any person who assumes the role of superintendent is expected to know everything about everything and to be everywhere at the same time. The position is scrutinized by the total number of persons who live within the school district boundaries, whether or not they have children attending the schools. Virtually every citizen knows a better way to run the school district because each person once went to school. Sometimes around the country, boards of education are almost impossible to deal with. Individually, with some members who forget that their purpose is setting policy, not administering it. So a superintendent must not only be super knowledgeable, but also courageous. The same type of courage that one might see in our military. That rather describes the superintendent of Manatee County, a soldier turned superintendent. Let's meet him now. Superintendent Rick Mills.
Thank you, Len. Pleasure to be here today and join you on the show.
Well, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
And I know you're only in Manatee County for a few months, really.
About 8.
8 months. So tomorrow you'll know where to get the coffee and stuff like probably.
I'm getting there.
Yeah. Where were you originally from, Superintendent? Should I call you Superintendent? Should I call you Rick?
Rick is fine, please.
Rick, okay. Where were you from, really?
I grew up in Pennsylvania. Went through K through 12 in the same school district in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It's actually Richland School District. And so graduated from that school district, and after my senior year, I enlisted in the military in the U.S. Army for 3 years and served as an enlisted soldier for that 3-year period. So grew up in Pennsylvania. I feel blessed to have had the opportunity to serve in the military out of high school as an enlisted soldier. And in my 3rd year as enlisted, I went to the United States Military Academy Prep School, which at the time is at Fort Monmouth. I understand it's now since moved to West Point. And eventually got an appointment to West Point and opted to go to a university back in Pennsylvania, Indiana University, Pennsylvania, and got my commission through ROTC and an ROTC scholarship. So I was in the Army ROTC program there at the university and got my commission 3.5 years later as a 2nd lieutenant in armor, and got my diploma and reported within 2 weeks of graduation to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where I started my basic training course as a 2nd lieutenant in armor, tanks, and graduated from there, went on to Ranger training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and then graduated from that, got my Ranger tab, and went on to Fort Hood, Texas, where I spent almost 4.5 years there in the 2nd Armored Division and the 1st Cavalry Division. So while I was at Fort Hood, I commanded a tank company for close to 24 months, 22 months time frame. In the 1st Cavalry Division, it was Company C of 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry. So I was talking to my assignment officer out of there and wanted a follow-on assignment to Europe, again in tanks, and basically I'd completed everything I needed to do at the captain level, So he looked for an opportunity for me to go to graduate school fully funded by the United States Army. And so I eventually went to Monterey, California, and attended the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, where I got my master's degree in National Security Affairs, Middle East Studies. And so again, another phone call, my assignment, I was supposed to go to Morocco on an assignment out of that graduate program, and the major there decided that he wanted to extend another year. So other options and opportunities, I was given the opportunity to go teach at West Point as a professor. And so I jumped on that opportunity, went there and taught a little under 3 years there as an assistant professor in the Department of Geography, taught several different courses in geography. While I was there, I also had a chance to coach football. I played at the high school level and played somewhat in college. And they have two football programs at West Point. One is the Division I football program that they have, intercollegiate. And they have another one that's intercollegiate, and I believe today 8 colleges and universities participate in this league, and it's called sprint football, which you have to weigh 172 pounds or less 2 days before game day. But it's intercollegiate football, and so it was a real joy for me to be a professor there, work with the cadets and teach in a classroom for 3 years, and also participate at a level of coaching intercollegiate sports. So it was a great assignment, very much enjoyed it.
What year was it when you went into the Army?
I got my commission in December of 1979 and reported for active duty in 1980.
Okay.
Prior to that, I went 3 years enlisted out of high school from 73 to 1976.
Wow. So what you're saying to me is that from 1976 until you retired, you didn't know what to do with yourself, right?
No, actually, it's the opposite.
Oh, really?
When I went enlisted out of high school, my sole purpose of doing that was to fund my education.
Cool.
And the GI Bill was quite active at the time. It was my only means to pay for my education, so I opted to serve my country for 3 years and then leave the military and use my GI benefits.
Okay, so now that comes up to 70.
Yes, in 76 I left the military, went to Indiana University, Pennsylvania, and went there using my GI Bill benefits as well as my ROTC scholarship funding. Mm-hmm. Then I got commissioned and graduated in December of 79 and went on active duty as a second lieutenant.
And so your passion for tanks, does that mean that General Patton was your hero or something, that you got into the tank industry?
Well, it's interesting. When I did serve enlisted, I knew that I wanted to become an officer in the Army. So at that point, I was very focused on getting my commission, hence ROTC and my commission. And my first choice in selection of branching was infantry. But I got armor as my second choice and not disappointed, really enjoyed it. And so my first 4.5 years were with the 2nd Armored Division and the 1st Cavalry Division at Fort Hood. And subsequently went back to the 4th Infantry Division later on in my career out at Fort Carson, Colorado, and served there about 3.5 years as a major, field grade level positions.
What does that mean you do? What does a major do in a tank division? I have no idea.
Well, coming out of Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, my initial assignment, I was on division staff for a year, which is typical as a major coming out of Command and General Staff College. And then usually you go down to the brigade level and then eventually to battalion level. And the reason why that's so critical for that kind of career path and opportunity and positions is to command a tank company to command a tank battalion or cavalry squadron, you have to serve at the battalion level, squadron level as the operations officer or the second in command position, XO.
And how many men would be involved in that, or tankers?
I was the executive officer of the tank battalion there, 235 Armor, and we had about 650, 700 soldiers in the battalion and 58 tanks. We had M1 tanks at the time. Yeah. So I did that for close to 18 months while I was in the 4th Infantry Division at Fort Carson. Wow. And so after that, I had an opportunity to serve as another assignment while I was being considered for command at the lieutenant colonel level. And so I went to U.S. Central Command at MacDill here at Tampa, Florida on a joint assignment.
Oh, so that's the way you got to look at this area.
That's right.
Yeah.
Was
Okay.
here almost 4 years at U.S. Central Command, where half of my time I spent, my first half, I was the political military advisor for United Arab Emirates and Oman, and I also had backup experience for Kuwait and Bahrain and Yemen, other countries, and served as the senior leadership team's advisor, political military advisor on those countries on military to military matters.
Did you have to learn any of those languages?
I actually went to French language training while I was at graduate school out in Monterey, and that's hence why I was going to be assigned to Morocco, to the embassy there, but that obviously changed.
So you never got to Morocco?
I've been to Morocco,
Well, yeah.
just not on a military assignment.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And
I've actually been to virtually almost every country from Morocco to Pakistan.
Wow, cool.
Yes.
And I don't know if you want to make any comments about life in that part of the world today as compared to when you were there. Is it?
I thoroughly enjoyed all my travel, everywhere I've been, Asia and Europe and the Middle East.
Yeah, you kept
it's just-
learning, obviously.
It's a lot to learn, it's a lot to experience. It was a very enjoyable experience to learn various parts of the world and different religions and cultures, et cetera, the architectural landscape. It was fascinating everywhere I went, and I just thoroughly enjoyed that.
It sounds like Las Vegas. But
There's only one Las Vegas.
Oh, there's only one Las Vegas, yeah. And then at somewhere you said you ended up in West Point.
Yes.
And I love West Point.
What a beautiful campus. If you've never been there, when you get to the Northeast area, it's certainly worth a trip and visit. There's so much history there. It's such a beautiful campus.
Absolutely.
You know, the Gothic architectural landscape there, the cadets, the parade field, the football games. It's just such a beautiful campus and ambiance. And what a great academic university.
Could you tell us what you taught, or did you say that already?
I taught 5 courses in geography.
Wow.
I started out teaching physical geography. Interesting story, the department chair at the time was Colonel Kirby, and I'd really gone there to teach cultural and political geography with my national security affairs background in Middle East studies. And so Colonel Kirby came in and said, you know, I really believe in the Renaissance person, so we're going to have you teach physical geography, which is, I haven't had a physical geography course since like
7th grade.
middle school. And so I was staying ahead of the cadets as I was teaching the course, but it was a fun course and I learned a lot about physical geography. And the next course that I taught the next semester was cultural and political geography. I taught military geography, I taught an elective in geography of North America, and had some fill-in teaching time with geography of the Middle East. So it was a good experience. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, there were movies. There have been movies made about West Point that make it sound just like a really truly magical place if you could be lucky enough to get there. In there, yeah.
So I had some time. I was at the time waiting to get to see if I was selected for Command and General Staff College, which is at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So I ended up going to the Middle East for a year, serving for the United Nations Truce Supervision Organization out of Jerusalem, Israel. And so I spent my first 5 months in Cairo, Egypt, as a military observer in the Sinai Peninsula. I would go out there with another fellow officer from different countries around the world. We had Scandinavian countries and Australia, et cetera, and we even had Soviet officers in the UN at the time there. And so it was an interesting experience to serve with your colleagues from different countries. Wow. So we'd go out to an observation post for a week at a time, and you and another observer, and spend a week out there with the UN presence and doing patrols in the Sinai Peninsula, et cetera, and representing the United Nations around that truce. And so I did that for 5 months, and then I went to be in the plans team in Jerusalem at the main headquarters there in Jerusalem, Israel, where about 7 or 8 months, I believe it was about 8 months, I spent as the plans officer for the chief of plans there. In Jerusalem, and so it was a great tour and a great assignment. Learned a lot. It was very interesting, and one of the great opportunities there was that the UN had its own aircraft that was assigned to it, and it flew different flights in the mission area there. So you could catch a flight to Larnaca or to Cairo or up to Damascus or Beirut, and so you really got a chance to travel while you're there, and it was a good assignment. I enjoyed it and I learned a lot.
Well, somebody must have thought pretty highly of you to put you into those kinds of positions, it would seem to me.
I feel real blessed that I had a great military career.
Yeah.
Over 24 years. It was a wonderful experience. I got to travel. I got to meet and work with some really phenomenal people. The men and women of our armed forces are just phenomenal folks.
Yep, I agree.
And the biggest thing, people ask me, what do you miss the most about the military? The camaraderie.
Yeah.
You know, you're in situations where you have to count on the person to your next in line, next to you, left and right. And so that's the ultimate level of trust and ultimate level of camaraderie. And
Is that coming up to some part of a philosophy of education, perhaps?
Folks in education are wonderful. I've had a very good experience since I left the military in 2001, and now 13 years in public education. Really great folks, very committed folks, very passionate, and I feel equally blessed to the experience I've had in the last 13 years in being in education.
What made you go to Chicago?
Well, it's a kind of an interesting story. I was commanding the 3rd Squadron, 16th Cavalry Regiment at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and Chicago Public Schools had just opened their first public military academy high school. And so a gentleman on the board that worked for the chair of the board, Jorge Oaklander, his son was in my cavalry squadron. And he was telling me about this new military academy they had in Chicago, and they were exploring an opportunity to forge a mentorship program with an active duty military unit. And so he asked me if I would be interested in doing something like that. So I asked him to put together a proposal around it, and then I submitted to my chain of command asking if they wanted me to move forward in like community outreach capacity, and they were very supportive around that. And so I ended up going up to Chicago and meeting with Mr. Oaklander about this concept of a mentorship program with this new military academy in Chicago. So while I was there,
This is a public school.
Yes.
Right?
So while I was there, I met Paul Vallis, who at the time was the CEO.
Yep.
And Paul served in the military in the Army Reserves, I believe, for 10 or 12 years. And so a lot of his experience in leadership is based and framed about his experience in the military, blended with his educational experience. And he was also, I think, the CFO for the city of Chicago. Anyway, Paul was very pleasant, very hospitable, and expressed an interest in coming to Fort Knox to see how the military was using technology in education and training. And so he eventually came down sometime later and spent 3 days in my cavalry squadron, him and Mr. Oaklander, and they were very pleased to see how far along the military was in technology and the utilization of it in instruction and training. But at the end of the 3rd day, it was kind of a conversation sitting around like this in my conference table in my office, and out of the blue, Mr. Vallis says, "So what would you like to come work for me in Chicago?" And so I was completely surprised by that, and I was honored that he asked that. And so I said, "Well, Mr. Vallis, you know, I'm just finishing up my first year of command with squadron, and I have another year left of command, and I'm not even thinking about retiring, to be honest. You know, my career's going well, and you know, I'm not even thinking about it." And I said, "But you know, I'm an open-minded person, so you know, I'll come up to Chicago and take a look at it and see, you know, what's going on in Chicago and what you're doing there in the district." And so about a month or two later, I went up for a weekend, spent time with Paul and some of his senior staff, and we were sitting in Chinatown at his favorite restaurant, King Wall, I think it was, restaurant there. And some of his senior staff was there, and he said, "So, are you going to come to Chicago?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "We'll work out the terms of it, but yeah, I like what I saw. I like the idea of what I've seen here in Chicago and the needs of the students and the passion around education of our youth. You know, it's time for me to consider a change." And so I literally had a job offer before I even had a resume.
Right.
Which is kind of the ideal way to transition out of one career to another.
Yeah. Yeah.
So eventually I had to write a resume, and it got approved by the board. And so I finished my 2nd year of command, and then I retired and changed command in the same ceremony. And so that was about a year later from my conversation with Paul. So I retired, and my actual retirement date was September 1st of 2001, 10 days before 9/11.
Yeah.
So I went to work to Chicago. Paul had already left. He had decided he was going to make a run for governor and did very well in that primary election, but was not selected by the voters. And so I ended up working for Arne Duncan, now our Secretary of Education, who was selected by Mayor Daley as the new CEO of Chicago Public Schools. Mm-hmm. And that's how I ended up leaving the military, and my story and my decision-making and opportunities around it. I thought I might have some regrets leaving the military, because at the time that Paul had talked to me about it, I wasn't thinking in the least of leaving the military.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful opportunity. I have absolutely no regrets. It's been a tremendous experience for me to be in public education and serve the needs of our students now in a third school district. And it's been a blessing for me in a career change and opportunity now 13 years.
Man, that's really cool. But 10 years in Chicago, where'd you live?
I lived in the city. It's a requirement if you work for the city, and that includes the public schools, because Chicago, the mayor is actually in charge of the school district.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the few urban school districts that the mayor is responsible for directly. So being part of the city, you're required to live in the city. So I had bought a home in the southwest Chicago city area.
Did you ever go to see the Cubs?
I went to the Cubs games, but the White Sox were closer. In fact, they weren't too far from where my offices were. And my wife today is an avid White Sox fan, and always has been. So I ended up going to more White Sox games than Cubs games, but did have the opportunity at one Cubs game sitting behind the home plate area, sat a few rows from the actor Bernie Mac, and so got a chance to meet Bernie, and what a great guy he was. And I'm a big Bernie Mac fan. I just loved his movies. But
so those years, and there were quite a few years that you were in Chicago, right? I mean,
I was there 10 years.
Yeah.
Started out running the military academies and JROTC programs. Chicago Public Schools has the largest JROTC program in the country. When I got there, we had around 7,500 students in the program there in 42 high school JROTC programs, and we expanded those numbers of programs up to, I think, 44. We had a middle school cadet corps program that we expanded, so we had students grade level 7th and 8th in the middle school program in our schools. And we had kind of 1.5 military academies when I got there. The one I'd mentioned earlier was up and running, and they were implementing in the first year another one where it was a regular high school that was being converted to a military academy over a 4-year period. Mm-hmm. So eventually we opened 6 military academy high schools there that I had oversight through the 10 years that I was there. And I did retain oversight even when I was an area superintendent of schools. They're called chief area officers there at the time. I still had oversight of all the JROTC programs to include all the military academies, but I also had regular neighborhood high schools in my portfolio.
Well, what was the reasons, or how would you encourage people to go to a military, how do you say it, a military academy, which is a public school, rather than a non-military academy, public high school, or whatever it would be? What's the difference?
The genesis of the military academies in Chicago was from Mayor Daley and Paul Vallis, of which Arne Duncan continued to support fully. And the concept around military academies in a large school district such as Chicago that has 430,000 students and over 600 schools, over 120 high schools, was to create opportunities of choice. And that was very much part of the vision of Chicago Public Schools, was to create opportunities and choice in education. And if you're going to have a culinary arts school, if you're going to have magnet schools, why would you not have a small portfolio of military academies? And it's certainly not a school for everyone.
No.
And we had a screening and application and selection process, which pretty much the criteria was more around, was this the best fit for the student?
Sure.
And so we were looking for students who wanted to be in a military academy, wanted to be in that kind of a learning environment, obviously more structure, more discipline. But these programs were phenomenal in our outcomes and results, and these schools did very well academically. We created opportunities in these schools to do competitive opportunities that weren't traditionally in some of our other schools. We had archery, we had fencing, we had orienteering that we did. And so we created more opportunities and activities and competitions in our schools, those particular military academies that were in traditional high schools, because I firmly believe that we need to develop our students as whole people, prepare them for citizenship, prepare them for leadership, and give them opportunities to flourish in the classroom and outside as well, to develop them completely and wholly.
Well, I would certainly agree with you on that. Could, in Chicago, let's say there were just a few military academy style schools. So could the students come from anywhere inside the city?
Yes. There was a citywide application opportunity. We actually had, there's no busing per se in Chicago for general population students. So it's all transportation either provided by parents or public transportation. We actually had cadets that attended our academies that would commute an hour, hour and a half one way to go to school.
Whoa.
At one of these academies. Very, very popular. We eventually got to, I'm a little dated now, but we had, generally speaking, 10, 15 applicants for every seat. So it's really a great model, and it was done very well in Chicago. I would consider as many people would as well, as it was the premier program in the nation for military academies in JROTC. We frequently had visitors from the Pentagon. We had chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff come visit our military academies, chiefs, naval office operations, secretaries, et cetera, come out and visit. We named one of our military academies after Admiral Rickover, and his wife came and was an active part of that Naval Academy, Rickover Naval Academy. So just a great model.
I went to several elementary schools in Chicago. I don't know if any of them are still around, but that must have been hard for you to leave that program. I mean,
it was near and dear to my heart.
Wow.
Spent 10 years taking it to where it is today.
Yeah. And
there's a great team in place still. You know, I think, you know, a sign of a good leader is putting an organization in place that's successful, that you could move on and somebody else can fall in on it and take it to the next level. And the team there now it's done that.
Nationwide leadership is something we could use a lot more of. That's we don't do it, and I also agree with the whole person development kind of notion, a piece of our culture. You know, there was a movement. I don't know if this ever connected with you, but there was a time, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. It actually came to us from England, and it was called. They used the word ethos, and there were whole systems built around that word, and there were claims made by a number of researchers who would say they could walk into a school and feel the ethos, the community that was in that school, and I thought, you know, there's some truth to that, and yeah. Well, then anyway, you left Chicago, and even had to go farther north. You were looking to get cold, I guess, to Minneapolis, and tell us about that experience, because it is different than Chicago, right?
It is. So I was area superintendent for high schools in Chicago, and really put together a successful team of principals and staff that really had tremendous results in student achievement around the performance of those schools. And it was at that point that I really got a passion for being a superintendent of a school district and having an opportunity to take a school district to the level of performance that we saw occur there over a couple-year period. And looking at my resume and opportunities, and we had a transition there from Mayor Daley to Mayor Emanuel, and there were changes going on there, et cetera. But I had good opportunities in Chicago, but I wanted to take that next job that would best prepare me for superintendency. And so I looked at the opportunities in Chicago, and then I looked at an opportunity in Minneapolis, which was the #2 position there for that school district for the superintendent. So they had posted the position as a deputy superintendent position. I had not had a superintendent license, and I knew I needed to get a superintendent license.
For the state of Minnesota?
Well, in general. Illinois did not have an alternative superintendent licensing program. So the opportunity to go be the #2 in a large school district such as Minneapolis, an urban school district, to get my superintendent license, which I met immediately with the state before even going there to work on how do you get your licensing there through the alternative program. And to make a long story short, since I didn't have my license and at the time, and of course everyone was aware of that, you cannot have the title of superintendent in the state of Minnesota. So they changed my title to Chief Executive Officer. So my position while I was there was #2 Chief Executive Officer of Minneapolis Public Schools, and I worked for wonderful Superintendent Bernadette Johnson. And so while I was there, I worked very hard at my contributions in support of her and the district to move that district forward, and got my superintendent license. And so I got the experience of running the day-to-day operations of a school district in that position, and got my superintendent license. So I was postured for opportunities then to look at superintendent positions throughout the country. And so I saw that Manatee County was available and posted in a national search, and I'd been here before, I lived here before. I spent 4 years at MacDill in Tampa. I loved the area, loved the folks down here, so it was a good fit. So I applied to probably a handful of different opportunities with sincere earnest, and this was the first opportunity I had to interview and be offered a position. So I feel very blessed to come here and be superintendent of Manatee County Schools. What a wonderful opportunity, and I'm very honored to do that.
Well, I think you're welcomed here too. I think so. You mentioned the word principals. I used to always say there's no such thing as a good school without a good principal.
Absolutely. I believe principals are the center of gravity of any school district. You got to have great principals.
Yeah.
And I spoke yesterday to all of our principals at a one-day professional development. I spent the first hour talking about leadership and building leadership capacity, and the focus of that session with the principals was how do we utilize assessment metrics and data as leaders to effectively drive performance, particularly in student achievement metrics. And I actually utilized the movie Moneyball to talk about how data and metrics were used to change baseball, and how they recruited and fielded teams and positioned teams. And that all change occurred, a book written by Bill James, Moneyball, that talked about using data and metrics. And then eventually there was a movie made starring Brad Pitt about the Oakland Athletics in their season 2002, where they shifted the paradigm in thinking the traditional way and more to a metrics data orientation of how they recruited and selected baseball players. At the time, the Oakland Athletics had a very nominal budget of $41 million compared to other Major League Baseball teams that had $120, $140 million budgets. And when you're competing with limited resources, you've got to get the most out of what you're doing, get the most out of your team, and you got to effectively use data and metrics to do that. So I shared that an hour yesterday with the principals. It was a great opportunity to talk about leadership development around metrics and data.
Yeah. Now, is there an expectancy that you are going to oversee all of the schools in Manatee County? Are you?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I mean, is there an intent that you're going to visit all of the schools and spend time with each of the principals individually?
Yes. Before arriving here, I wrote a 100-day plan using a model from another school district as the foundation for that. Yeah. And part of that plan was listening and learning by getting out in the community, getting out in all the schools, getting out in all the departments of the district. So I spent a large portion of my first 100 days visiting all of our 53 schools, and a few of our charter schools, which I will get to this year, and also talking to every staff and faculty. So it was very much a point to get to meet and talk to and talk with our staff and faculties in all our schools, all our departments, to hear what the challenges are, the concerns, whatever they wanted to share with me, that would give me a better understanding from the grassroots per se of what's the thoughts and thinking in the school. So I could then move in eventually to more of a planning and execution focus and vision for the school district. And I really didn't want to be in any way perceived as a leader that comes in and immediately changes or immediately says this is the vision without getting out in the community, out in the schools, out in our departments, and hearing and listening to folks, great employees that we have, great people in the community, on what their concerns and challenges are, or whatever they want to share with me. And I feel if there's something in the last 8 months that I've done that I would do over 100 times again, it would be that. Get out and get to every school. I actually had a teacher at one of the schools sitting up front, raised her hand when I got to the questions portion, and said that she's been in the school district for 34 years, and that in her first year of teaching, she met her first superintendent, and that day she met her second.
And how many superintendents since? I wonder. In 34 years in Manatee County. There have been a number of superintendents since I've only been here for 15 years, and I know we've had a number of different superintendents. But to try to get to every school, I hope you're reimbursed for travel.
Well, we were doing sometimes pretty much we're doing 2 school visits a day.
Yeah.
My executive assistant, Darlene, and I would go out together. What a wonderful lady she is, and a great,
she's been around
great
long
team
time.
member.
Yeah.
She's phenomenal. We would go out and visit 2 schools a day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. I wanted to schedule as such that I get the opportunity to talk to the staff and faculty of every school. Then I would do a tour, and I would sit down. And my whole focus in my session with the principals then was just to get an opportunity to get to know each other.
Yeah.
Really didn't want to get in there and talk about data and instruction or whatever, because I think it's really important that there's been some relationship building initially to build a foundation on around that. So.
But then at the same time that you're going to the individual schools and meeting with the individual staff, do you or do you not have to meet with the individual community leaders?
Oh yeah,
I
have endless list of opportunities to get out and meet our community members, our elected officials, get out and speak at organizations. We did several Soup with the Soups for lunches that were open to the community, where we had soup and sandwiches, etc. And I would serve soup, and then I would get up and give a brief presentation, and then do questions and answers, etc. It's very, very important to establish a relationship with your community and build that relationship as well as engage them. And we've started a new initiative in the school district, which I believe is in the right direction of true community engagement in the education process. And last night, we had a very wonderful session last night with many of the SAC chairs or representatives from our schools to kick off a true community engagement of engaging our community members as we move forward as a school district around strategies and initiatives. And engagement means, in my mind, engaging them up front before you start the planning process, not at the end after you're done and coming out and saying, here's what we're going to do. That's not, in my mind, true engagement. True engagement is getting feedback and input and valued advice from your community members, from your parents, from your stakeholders, as you start an initiative, not at the end of it.
That almost sounds like the closer you are to the task, the better you know it, sort of thing.
And the more you can do collaboration and get feedback, the better. I believe that you build greater capacity in a school district by including all your stakeholders in the process up front. And when you do that, then you get true engagement and build your capacity. But in the end, you want shared accountability around what you're doing. And you can't get shared accountability with stakeholders or people in the community or parents unless they're at the table with a voice.
Can you talk about state testing?
Sure.
Do you think it's a good idea?
Well, there seems to be some confusion or challenges around the Common Core. Obviously, we have the FCAT, and that's what's been in the state of Florida, but 46 states have adopted the Common Core, and Common Core is just benchmark standards per se. It's not the content instruction, it's not the curriculum being delivered in a classroom, it's the standards for which we expect our students to meet by grade level and graduate from high school with. Mm-hmm. And so when you have 46 states adopting the same standards, then you have uniformity across the nation around what do we have those expectations around of our students when they graduate from high school. And we all understand that it's important for our students to graduate from high school, and if they go on to post-secondary education with diplomas from colleges, so that they can compete in the global economy, which obviously is very important today, given the nature of the global interdependence that exists in the world. Mm-hmm. And so Common Core basically raises the rigor around the standards and requires teaching critical thinking skills of your students to meet those standards. And then, of course, you have associated assessments that are your state assessments to monitor the performance of school districts around meeting those standards.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this one. What do you think of preschool, the notion of preschool?
I think it's very, very important that every school district have an effective early childhood program in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. I can remember spending countless hours reading to my son when he was 2 or 3 or 4 years old, and he could pretty much read a newspaper by the time he was 6.
That's right.
And I think that was critical to his academic success. So those formative years, those early years, VPK, other programs are very critical around getting our students into kindergarten at mm-hmm. level or even beyond to set them up for success for outlying grade level years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and your son was fortunate enough to have a father read to him. In today's world, we've got a lot of families that are, single parent. Kids don't have any idea who their grandparents were.
Well, we have situations where we have many challenges in our families and for our families.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've been working collectively with the leadership of the county of Manatee, which is they've been very receptive around, is how do we, as the leaders of the county, come together to look at the challenges of our youth in Manatee County and to identify students, families, et cetera, that are being challenged around issues of economics, homeless. There's a myriad of different things, and it was eye-opening for me going to Chicago. Many of the challenges of folks living in Chicago and trying to raise a family, and we just need to be mindful and understand that we do have families and students that have challenges.
Oh boy!
And how are we coming together as leaders in Manatee County to meet those needs and the services that are needed to help them be successful?
Yeah, tough job, and it's with the families of the youngest children, since they don't go to school, there's got to be some other option. I mean, like, for the little kids who are growing up and they may have only one parent and that parent works.
Well, collectively, as a county leadership team, how do we come together in education, as a county, as Chamber of Commerce, all our organizations, and this is just a tremendous county here. I was very, very pleased to come here. I was very graciously warmly received, very hospitable, and we really have folks in this county who really want to make a difference for our youth, and mm-hmm. so very, very much a commitment around mm-hmm. that. It never ceases to amaze me how much support in this community rallies around our students and our children in the county.
But are you going to be able to deal with all the criticism of the school district, not under your leadership, but under past leadership or whatever? It might not have been the fault of the leadership, even as far as that goes. I don't know. But I'm not one of the critics. But I mean, from what I've read, especially the financial track that's been bammed all over the place. And can you deal with that?
Well, I've been asked this question often and numerous times. Is it worse than you really thought coming here? And I have answered it honestly, yes. And the team that's in place now would obviously agree with that. But we're more interested in moving forward and how we're going to move this school district to greatness. But in reality, we had to be candid and honest with the public on some of these challenges. And if you read Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, you know, no organization can get to greatness until you identify what your challenges are. He calls them the brutal facts. And you have to get it out there. It's not a crutch for the new leadership team. It's a reality. Here's what our challenges are, and here's how we're going to move forward, and here's how we're going to get to greatness. And so that's our focus right now, and has been for the last several months. But the reality is we still find challenges every day that have been ongoing here for years. But I had a meeting with the principals on August 6th, and I asked them all to stand up in the audience and to turn around, face the back of the room, and to raise their right hands and wave. And of course they're thinking, okay, we got a nutty superintendent here. But then I asked them to turn around and sit down. I said, what did we just do? We had a significant emotional moment where we're waving to the past and we're focusing on the future.
That's cool. Yeah, I don't know very many of the principals here anymore. I know some, but not very many, because I felt pretty close to the principal some years ago. And I thought, geez, what a great group of men and women who I knew. And well, I said in the beginning, from my perspective, I would never take your job, the role of the superintendent. I wish that maybe what would be helpful would be if you invited members of the public who wanted to one day be a superintendent to spend a day following you around, seeing what do you have to do, and so
I think
on.
that's a great idea, Len.
Yeah, well, thank you. I used to, in fact, I evaluated a couple of principals, not evaluated, that's the wrong word. And what I used to do is I would arrive at a school minutes before the before the principal was due. And then from the time the principal arrived, every five minutes by my watch, I would write down what the principal was doing. And I would do that until the end of the school day when the principal left the school. And then I divided into certain categories of ways to use your time. And I realized that I was only marking the fifth minute. There were 4 minutes in between, so I understand that. But on the 5-minute mark, I would note the principal was talking to a parent, the principal was answering a phone call, the principal was making a phone call, whatever. And then you could put it into percentages of how you spend your day. And it's at the end of the day, every principal would be shocked. I mean, almost every principal. No, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. You know, well, yeah, you did. I mean, sorry. But, when I think of the superintendents who I've known across the years, that the pressure that's on them to attend 14 meetings at 1 o'clock or something like that, and you have to choose. Now, how am I going to choose? And and all that sort of thing. So I think just to our audience, I would say, please love your superintendent and really stand behind the superintendent. And you don't need to hope and wish for better schools. Work for it. It takes an awful lot of people to make a school district what it ultimately becomes.
Well, Len, as I may say, I've said this over and over again as I spoke to the community and the staff and faculties in the schools. Whatever we are doing in a school district, all roads lead to kids in the classroom.
Yeah,
and so we all need to understand that whatever you're doing in a school district, you are somehow impacting kids either directly or indirectly and making a difference. And I'm very, very proud of our team in Manatee County Schools. I know many people have told me I wouldn't want your job as superintendent, but in reality, I think the tougher jobs are in the schools. Teaching in a classroom, being a principal of a school, those are tougher jobs. But I feel very blessed to be a superintendent here.
The leader. Is there any other comments that you would like to make, or anything else, or
No, it's just been a privilege and honor to join you today on your show.
Well,
And
thanks for
I'm very
coming.
grateful for the invitation. I look for every opportunity to speak to the public and on shows or
Well, this
luncheons
might
or
be one.
dinners. And so I just want to get the message out that
Sure.
our school district is on the path to greatness, and a lot of great things are being done. And we're starting to share those. If you haven't seen the briefings from Dr. Diana Green on academics or on operations on Don Hall, our Deputy Superintendent for Operations, from the last board meeting on Tuesday night, they did wonderful jobs and updates and really driving home some of the great successes that are occurring now around the school district, and what a bright future we have. And I just would like to extend to all our residents of Manatee County, we're going in the right direction.
Okay, welcome. Welcome to Manatee County.
Thank you.
And thanks for being here with us today. And that brings to a close today's program. I wish to thank our special guest, Superintendent Rick Mills. I personally wish him great success as the leader of our Manatee County schools. I hope that you will do the same. I wish to thank the staff of METV for making this program available to you, and most of all, I thank you, our viewers, for taking the time necessary to watch our program out of your own busy schedule. Finally, please remember that freedom is never free, the cost is very high, and it is paid for by our men and women who serve in our military and their families. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.